Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our call. We put this together, Chris and I, based on a lot of feedback we've been having from watershed groups in both of our areas, me being in Massachusetts, Chris being in Vermont. And we decided to put together this call, citizen-based aquatic field sampling in the time of COVID. Many of the people on the line are volunteer coordinators. So you may have been scratching your head wondering how to deal with this upcoming field season in light of everything that's going on. So this is not intended to be a prescriptive list of what we think you should do. This is really more of a best practices brainstorm. So we want to provide the information that we have found and also hear from you so that you can share with your colleagues and peers what the best steps forward might be. Let's see, okay. I'll actually start with some housekeeping. Everyone is currently muted right now. So we put a blanket mute on everyone. However, you are able to unmute yourselves. If you are new to Zoom and if you're on a laptop or an iPad or tablet, it should be on your bottom left, an option to unmute yourself. The various ways to communicate with us, the best is really by writing in the chat box, writing a comment that you might have. If you want to go beyond having it in writing and you want to be able to speak up or further describe your comment, just write 3 asterisks in the chat box, and we're going to try to monitor the chat box really well and be able to call on you so that you have an opportunity to speak off of mute. We'll also be using a Google Sheet in just a few minutes, and that's going to be another way you can contribute your ideas. And there's always direct email access to both Chris and I. Let me just do one last waiting room look. Okay.
Yeah, I'm monitoring if that helps. And I just posted the Google document that we'll be using in the chat for folks to see.
Great. We'll be putting that in the chat again a little bit later. I realize it might get lost. There's a lot of chat activity going on right now. So you will see that again later when it's needed. So hello, to start with introductions. My name is Jill Carr. I am at the MassBays National Estuary Partnership here in Boston, Massachusetts. We are an organization. We are currently hosted by Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management, and we work with local communities and watershed groups in the coastal area on their coastal monitoring programs, and as well as restoration and conservation. And I'll let Chris introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Stepanuk. I work at the University of Vermont with programs called Lake Champlain Sea Grant and the University of Vermont Extension, and work kind of nationally on volunteer water monitoring activities through past time with the Citizen Science Association Board and with the National Water Quality Monitoring Council volunteer monitoring group. And I used to be in Wisconsin, and so I see some familiar faces from out there. So glad to be here with you all today.
Great. Chris and I were connected recently. I work with a lot of our watershed groups in the MassBays region, and I've received some questions recently about, what do we do? How do we approach this field season in light of everything? Is there any guidance available? And I connected with Chris with the same question, and it turns out she's been getting that question as well. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to sort of bring everyone together to discuss. As much as I wish we could sort of go around the digital room and introduce ourselves, in light of that, we're going to do some polling questions instead, just to sort of see where folks are from. So if you take a look at your screen, you're going to see 3 polling questions. And you can go ahead and answer each one with a click. And it's neat, you can watch the statistics as the answers come in.
I'm not sure they can see that, but we'll show you in a minute if they can.
Okay.
We might have a privilege on that.
It also won't allow you to do more than one. So it says check all that apply, but it only allows you to do one.
Uh-oh, my bad. Sorry. Pick your favorite. Sorry.
For folks that are just joining the room, we're doing a quick poll to just get a sense for where folks are from that are on the call and what sort of habitats they work in.
All right, we're gonna, 90% of people have voted. I think that might be, some folks are on the phone, so we're gonna end the poll and I'm gonna show you the results. So you can see we have about almost 50% nonprofits, 42% some kind of federal, state, or local government, no tribes, about 13% academia, 2% some kind of other representation. What you couldn't check all that apply, so your favorite, we have 53% rivers and streams, 20% estuarine, 4% marine, 3 beaches, 12% lakes and ponds, no wetlands folks, 1% groundwater, and 7% other types of environments. And in our representation is almost mainly in Northeast, 62% from the Northeast, 11% from the Southeast, 0% South Central, 5% Southwest, 4% Northwest, 1% North. Oh, I got 2 Northwests. Sorry about that, folks. 11% Midwest, 3% Canada, 2% another country, and we have Hawaii, who I probably was going for Alaska and Hawaii, and I think I copied and pasted Northwest and didn't put Alaska and Hawaii. So awesome. Thank you, everybody. Glad you're here. I'm going to stop sharing that.
Great. Very interesting. We really, we span the map and a whole host of organizations and habitat areas. So the format for the rest of this webinar, or brainstorm session, I'm going to quickly talk about the problem that we're all dealing with right now, provide some existing guidance that we've seen, and then we'll get to the real meat of the matter, which is compiling our recommendations as a group. For anyone just joining the line, please take a moment to look at the housekeeping notes on the right-hand side of the screen. We're recording this call. You will be automatically muted, but can unmute yourself. And you can also communicate in other ways with us, like the chat box and using the Google Sheet and email. So the problem, the obvious are health concerns. There are concerns about COVID spreading person to person between volunteers and staff, between volunteers and lab personnel and the public. There are an assortment of connections that can be made there that are concerning. And not only is the person-to-person spread alarming, but the risk of spreading via contaminated surfaces that people are touching, or even water that you may be sampling in. For example, if you, in your group, sample in a body of water that receives combined sewer overflow discharges, so you may be dealing with raw sewage in the water. The ultimate health concern is, how do you ensure the safety of your volunteers? As project coordinators, as you know, there's a lack of existing relevant guidelines for you to follow, especially for volunteer-based fieldwork activities. There may be worries about what the liability is if volunteers are allowed to monitor. So our goals today are to provide you with a space for you and your peers to compare and share ideas, and ultimately to create a list of best practices that you can work from as you develop your plans for this field season and future field seasons. So to go over some of the existing guidance that we've come across, Chris is going to take it from here.
Yes, we have information that was shared from Hillary Burgess with the COAST program in Washington. And some of the highlights from what she shared, I'll go over, but just to let you know, we will also share the slides, and we have Jill transferred everything into that Google document as well. So some of the things that they're doing is making sure people stay home if they are feeling ill. They're having people monitor or survey by themselves or with people who are there already isolating with. If there's somebody who's outside of the household that they're going to be working with, they're going to have them drive separately to maintain that social distancing that's being, the guidelines are being shared, and maintaining that social distance throughout the time that they're monitoring, and whether they are monitoring 5 meters, which we know is 16.4 feet, they can, in this particular program, keep their social distance by their methodologies. Ready for the next slide. Also had input from Elizabeth Heron with the University of Rhode Island Watershed Watch. She had just a handful of guidance tips that she's focusing on. One is having transferred her trainings to be online. In Rhode Island, they're actually still allowed to have small gatherings, so up to 5 people. So later in the season, she'll be having small group gatherings. They postponed the start of their season, and then they've also extended the window of any sampling period to a longer time so that there's fewer people coming into the lab. They're also considering the possibility of going around to do a pickup, so it's contactless pickup and drop up of samples. And she stressed the part that they are no longer able to make homemade food for the volunteers for those small trainings they can have. They're doing packaged food, so it's a disappointing piece of the COVID as well. Next slide. Here in Vermont, a couple of programs. One is that I'm working with students, and another from the Ottaquechee River, where for safety purposes, not knowing, because we don't have the testing available to know if we are ill or if anybody's ill, we have made sometimes decisions to not be monitoring, simply to maintain safety of lab personnel and others. And in some cases we said, well, if it's the person's is able to safely go on their own to a monitoring site, and it is not a risk with water quality or social distancing, then it's safe. Or if lab samples are able to be, our lab in Vermont has been deemed essential. So in one case, the example is the students that were collecting data, their samples happened to be in the same building where the lab was, and so the lab manager could just go pick up the samples and analyze them, and there was no contact needed between the volunteers and the lab. We do also have some examples where it's, again, not safe because of connection between people. Next slide. And then from California, Eric Burris shared a number of different resources. In that state, the volunteer monitoring has been deemed non-essential, and there's mandatory stay-at-home orders. So at the moment, there is no monitoring. However, a number of resources have been made for other purposes. For instance, a project go or no-go guidance. It's like a family tree for a program to decide, do they answer yes or no to this question, and being able to decide by answering a number of questions whether or not they should be out in the field and monitoring. He also shared resources of confirming who is an essential employee. So that person, if they are essential, has a letter that they carry with them to share to prove that they're essential if somebody's asking, and a few other resources as well about making advanced plans for social distancing and communications if somebody does become ill. Back to Jill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so these are relatively different examples here from different states, and something to keep in mind is the state regulations and advisories are going to differ across the board as well. So I can speak for Massachusetts, at least as of yesterday, we were on a stay-at-home advisory and not a stay-at-home order, as opposed to essential businesses being on a closure order. They had to be closed. So other states may have a stay-at-home order, such as Vermont. So that's something that should be your first step as a coordinator, to look into your particular state if you haven't already. So this is getting us into really the compilation part, the goal of this meeting. And the way we decided to break down the recommendations were into these different bins. So we wanted to have recommendations for coordinators and things to consider in their projects going forward, and a different list of recommendations for field crews, including before they even leave home, so making the go or no-go decision for field crews that are working in the field, and then people in the lab or connecting with people that are in the lab. So again, at this point, I want to remind you of ways to communicate with us. There's a link at the bottom of the screen here where our Google Sheet is, and we're also going to be putting that in the chat right now. We've never tested 200 people accessing a Google Sheet at the same time, so we're going to see how this goes. If for whatever reason it's not working for us, then we can just rely on the chat box instead. So you can see that link in the chat right now. But I will be covering, in the next couple slides, I will be covering what is in that Google Sheet so far. So you won't be missing anything if you're just calling in and can't look at a screen right now. So starting with coordinators, project considerations. This is sort of a compilation of everything we saw from the previous 4 slides that Chris shared, as well as some common sense type things that we were thinking. So first and foremost is to defer to your local Board of Health and check very regularly to ensure that you are complying with those regulations and advisories. They can change rapidly, as you all know. Where you can, use solo samplers or same household teams. Conduct your training sessions online. I know many of the groups I'm chatting with already in Massachusetts are moving in that direction. Use social distancing and no contact protocols when you're passing off equipment, data sheets, or lab samples. As a project coordinator, this is probably a good time to get in touch with any state certified labs you're working with. They may already have a protocol in place, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just go by what they recommend. Consider making cleaning supplies available to samplers if you can. Extra hand sanitizers, gloves, and wipes for the equipment. Supplement your SOP documents with COVID recommendations. So that should be the documents that people are reviewing right before they go out in the field, or maybe they have them in the field with them. Reconsider sampling sites which may pose a greater risk for people. If people are sampling in a high traffic area where passerbys end up getting engaged and asking a lot of questions about the monitoring. If it's a site that requires samplers to park in state lots or other parking lots that might be closed, that's an important consideration. Consider requiring more consider removing sites that might require more samplers than you can safely assign to a site. So, if you're doing fish netting in a river and you require 5 or 6 individuals to hold the net, that might be something you need to push off until another time. And also reconsider a site that might be prone to raw sewage release, as I mentioned earlier. The current information and understanding about this exposure is fairly limited. But there are indications that COVID and coronavirus can survive in raw sewage released in water, marine and freshwater environments. The actual vector to getting it to a person, it's less understood, but it's better safe than sorry in that case. Also consider assigning individuals with specific equipment and tasks that will minimize equipment sharing. So really one person has one piece of equipment that day until it can be fully sanitized. And this is pretty important for project coordinators. Start contacting your funding sources now if you haven't already, so that you understand any changes to your grant requirements. A lot of grantors are being flexible in these times. I know EPA, for example, has made concessions for people. They have a whole website with what you should do. Now we're getting into guidance. This is for volunteers before leaving home. Things that they need to consider. Again, they should be referring to their Board of Health, and they really need to know if themselves or any member of their household is feeling unwell with symptoms. Do not sample. It's just not worth it. The data are not that important. Do not carpool with partners from outside of your household. Bring your own PPE, personal protective equipment like gloves, cloth face mask, things of that nature, sanitizers. Discuss any sampling concerns you may have with your coordinator, and have a plan in advance for parking, restrooms, where you're going to eat your meals, what you're going to be eating. Are you going to plan to stop at McDonald's on your way home? Have a plan in place for all of these things so that you can reduce your exposure. Okay. In the field, if you're working with partners from outside of your household, obviously maintain the 6-foot social distancing, wear your PPE, wash hands, use sanitizers. These are all, practically straight from the CDC guidance. Minimize equipment sharing. As I said before, for the coordinators, groups should be sticking to one task for the day if possible. If they need to share equipment, don't pass it hand to hand. So there's ways of doing that. There could be a center point between two people where person one goes and drops the equipment, backs away. Person two can go and take the equipment. Keeping in mind sanitation and PPE. Using disinfecting cloths or spray, especially in high touch points like pencils, clipboards, and tote handles. Any data sheets should be denoted with temporary modifications to the practices, as well as any chain of custody paperwork, so that years from now, folks aren't looking at the data sheets and just wondering what the heck was going on. I mean, I'm sure they're going to do that anyway, but let's try to make it a little easier on them. And if you're engaged by passersby while you're doing your field monitoring, maintain your social distancing. And you know, I can envision a scenario where people get upset that people are out working and collecting data. Volunteers should be referring questions and concerns to the coordinators. They shouldn't feel pressured to deal with that sort of conflict on their own if it comes up. In the lab, or if your volunteers need to go to a gear shed for equipment or an office, consider staggering drop-off of samples or equipment so that multiple people aren't going there at the same time. If possible, practice the no contact relay that I mentioned, where you drop it somewhere in between two people. Disinfect lab equipment before and after use. Limit the number of staff in the building at any time. And really consider the ingress and egress to the facility or the building that reduces contact and people having to come close to each other. So this has really been a synthesis of what we've seen so far, as well as some sort of common sense type things that we added to the list. But this is where we need your contributions. So chime in. Again, you can write in the chat box. You can just leave it there, or you can write some asterisks for us, and we will call on you to unmute yourself, and you can talk a little bit more about your recommendation. You can add to the Google sheet that's been posted there.
There's one question that maybe we could start with that was put a minute ago by Joanne Muramoto. Are there any states where employers or coordinators are required to test temperatures of staff and interns or volunteers?
Hi, Joanne. That's a great question. Let's see if we hear back from anyone.
So sounds like maybe not yet that we're aware of. I'm going to go to the next one. If folks do have an answer to that, we can put it in the chat. What about how to deal with signing off chain of custody forms? Does anyone have guidance on that yet? One thing I've seen in other realms is using separate pens, using individual pens by the volunteer and the lab, and doing it remotely. So it's a drop off at safe distance, sign it so you can see somebody signing, and then the other person can move in to collect the information.
Mm-hmm. A question from Regina: how are people dealing with decon of shared vehicles? The recommendation we've seen so far is it should really be household members sharing a vehicle together. But if you're talking about a group getting into a vehicle and then a different group getting into the same vehicle, routine disinfection would probably be the smartest step there.
So there's some tips here. Joanne has a tip on considering partitions, plexiglass between people working in a lab, or other ways to physically separate people. We may be getting 2 tents to house interns while they're analyzing samples. So that's a nice way to separate, to get a little bit more space for people. There's a question Emily Vale is asking, wondering about a first step to check in with volunteers about their individual risk or availability. Some volunteers may not be willing or able to volunteer their time because of higher risk or having new burdens on their time. So we welcome others to unmute and help us answer questions with your thoughts. You can, if you don't know how to unmute, you can mouse over your Zoom screen, and over in the lower left is the mute button.
Hi, I'm Emily Green, and I want to respond to Emily Vale's question about, addressing volunteers when they might, checking in with volunteers. So I have a bunch of volunteers that are really great. We do beach profile monitoring, and they are all, unfortunately, within that age range of being at risk of contracting the virus. So that's not great. So what I've been doing is weekly check-ins with them. I send out, we have team leaders, and so I sort of check in with those team leaders and I say, hey, how are you guys feeling today? How are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help make your job easier? Most of our beaches in Maine have been closed, some just by executive order, but still the municipalities are allowing some beaches to stay open. So that's interesting. But I think the most important thing, I've sort of planned for something like this when I first came on to this position about 3 years ago. And I said, I think it's good if we have usually teams of 3 monitor the beaches at each beach that we collect data on. And I said, it would be really great if you had alternates on your teams that could sort of switch out every month and, share the responsibility of collecting data. So I sort of, unfortunately, we don't have a handbook or an SOP on handling volunteers during things like this. And I had asked my supervisors if there was anything like this, and there isn't. So Emily, I think I'm in the same boat as you, but also, I don't know if it's possible for you to have, or if you have alternate volunteers. I don't know how you coordinate your volunteers, but for us, it's been a huge advantage to have alternates. And I started doing that about 3 years ago with each team, saying, hey, do you guys have a need for more recruitment? Do you need more hands on deck in case one of you can't make it? Because our volunteers are very good at sort of divide and conquering and then staying to those responsibilities only and not really switching it up and sharing roles, which is totally fine. But when one of those people isn't available to help volunteer, it makes getting alternates a little bit more difficult. So I have alternates, and that's been really helpful for us.
That's awesome. Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to go to the next question and see if anybody else wants to chime in on that one. So somebody asks, Danielle DeHart asks, how is training done online when volunteers have not been to the stream? For example, how do you train somebody to collect benthic macroinvertebrates digitally? Does anyone want to field that from experience?
This is Kate Laramie from the Huron River Watershed Council in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I don't have a great direct answer to that question, but one thing that we've discussed a lot is whether or not we should be doing any volunteer trainings online for new volunteers that have never been to the stream, just because of all the questions about volunteer liability and everything that people have been bringing up in the chat, concern over people feeling pressured to participate or taking risks that maybe they shouldn't. So we're still in a planning phase right now, but generally we're leaning towards relying on some of our seasoned volunteers that we are comfortable with their field ethic and have worked with in the past and know really well. And we're still trying to figure out how best to get all of the training that we need to them and to keep them safe. So that's, part of us participating in webinars and things like that. But generally, we've been really concerned about bringing on new folks this season.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So this is Lisa Barrero from Three Rivers Quest, and we do water quality monitoring in the Three Rivers area around Pittsburgh. But I also teach biology and microbiology at a few local colleges. And we, of course, went online with labs, which are, how do you do a lab? How do you teach a person how to do a lab if they never have? So it's a similar situation to what you're dealing with your volunteers. And what I did was, before they locked us out of the lab was I was able to go in and I videotaped my actual experiments, me doing them. I recorded them on the webcam on this program called Loop. It's like free and you can edit. Anyway, and then I posted those videos on our learning management system. And the students really got a kick out of it and felt that they were really able to, they felt they'd be able to do that experiment on their own if they had gotten into a lab. So I don't know that necessarily training new people now is a good idea, but if you're forced to do that, one way you could do it is have somebody go out to actually do the sampling and just video it as you do it, and you're talking about it, walking through all the steps, and it's almost like training.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. It's a great idea.
Yes, and keep an eye on the chat box, or you may need to scroll up. Some groups are posting some great resources for training materials.
Somebody asked about the Google Doc. I will put the Google Doc back in, I'll post it in the chat here again, just a second for the folks who asked that. Jill, do you see another question we want to pose to folks from the chat?
Let's see.
Here I've got one. Curious to know how many groups who sample for pathogens are going to delay sampling for fear of viral transmission via sewage pollution. Sounds like at least one in Cape Cod. Maybe the organizers could run a poll. You're nodding. That's oh, you want me to run a poll about, oh, I love the idea. I can set up a poll. Hold on a second. I'm the organizer. I'm with you. Just a second. Let me create. Why don't we talk about something else while I create?
I can actually weigh in on that while we wait.
Okay.
My name is
Sounds good.
I do sampling in the Los Angeles County area. I work at a nonprofit called Heal the Bay. And so we're often sampling water that is contaminated with sewage. Not only are there individuals living in the stream bed, but there are often, tens of thousands of gallons of raw sewage getting spilled into the LA River. So, we practice, no water contact for the sampler. So you have to make sure you have waders and boots on, always changing gloves. And, given the, circumstances, I might even recommend a face shield if you're really concerned about that. But generally, there are so many pathogens in sewage anyway that COVID really isn't, it is an additional risk, but you should have already been worried about the sewage, in the first place. So, just practice no water contact.
Mm-hmm.
That's great input. Thank you. We have a question from Laura Trudell. Hi, Laura. Oh, let's finish this poll first.
Sorry, I threw it up there. So good idea on the polling. Thank you for that idea. We got about 50% voted at this point.
And on this topic, some rivers really do have a pretty good notification system in place for when a combined sewer overflow does happen, and some rivers don't. So you may feel more comfortable than others to continue sampling.
All right, I'm gonna end the poll so we can go on to the new thing, and I will share with you the results. There's your results.
Great, thanks. So I'll go back to Laura's question. What are the legal aspects of having volunteers? Do the volunteers need to sign a release form? Most groups that I've seen do work with release forms when a new volunteer comes on board, just because there are a lot of inherent risks in doing field work, working in riparian areas and in the water, all sorts of risks. So this is just one more risk, I guess you could put it that way. If anyone else has insight on that in terms of legal aspects, if you're protected with just a release form, please chime in.
Are there other questions that folks want to pose to the group to converse about? I'm looking through the chat, trying to pull out ones with lots of good resources being shared. Here's a question. I don't think, Jill, that you just talked about. Apologies, I was sending somebody the link to the Google, but do we know whether or not hand sanitizer has anything in it that might contaminate samples? So it's alcohol. Seems like it would be sterilizing. What is going on in terms of contamination? I don't know for sure. Does anybody have thoughts on the concerns about that? I think the good lab practices is probably the best thing in terms of not touching the inside of the bottles or the inside of the caps or whatnot, and sort of standard practices for how we would want to handle lab equipment or field equipment in terms of a contamination issue. There's a question for recommendations for disinfectant. If you haven't seen the EPA, I can look up the link for it. The EPA has recommendations for what cleaning products will work against COVID, and there's a website that lists those, and they list them by product name as well as the type of surface that they can be used for. They're not made for humans, they're made for objects, but that could be useful as well. I'll post that in the chat in a minute. Are there other questions folks have that you want to pose verbally or in the chat? Okay, I found a question here. We're interested in specifically tracking changes in wastewater due to lack of tourists. Is anyone else looking at this type of sampling design? I'm going to put yes, no, and does not apply. And I'm going to post it to you all so you all can answer. Here's a new poll for everybody to answer that question. And the slash is a question. We're 70% voted. I'm going to call it so you can see in 5 seconds. All right, here you go. There are your results. So there's about 10% of folks, 14 people on the call are looking to track changes in wastewater due to lack of tourists. And 53% are saying no, and another 37% it doesn't apply to them. Someone asked of the recommendations for boat-based work. The growing season for Bill Crowell is May to June, may lose a year if that's not sampled. So anyone out there doing boat-based work that you have recommendations that you've come up with for your programs or that you would like to share that you're thinking of just now when the question is posed?
This is Lisa Kump from Charles River Watershed Association. I don't have recommendations, but I'll echo the question. We have both boat-based water sampling that usually our interns do in small boats about 8 feet long, as well as volunteer water chestnut pullers who hand pull from canoes. So any help would be great.
This is Jill. I would probably treat a boat much like a vehicle. If it's the size of a vehicle and people can't get further than 6 feet away from each other, it should probably be a household only team on the boat. Does anyone else have thoughts on that?
Hi, this is Jane Shuttleworth from Iowa, and we are doing the same. We're having household only teams or people who are what we call quarantine teams. And then we're also giving our teams their own equipment. So like their own Sechi discs and such, so that we don't have to exchange that. They'll be having them for the whole summer. And they just have to pick up their bottles and drop them off, and we're going to do the filtering instead of them.
There's a comment. I'm emailing with Kelly Stetner, who's here in Southern Vermont. One of the idea for in the field, she said she's going to be providing this year's volunteers with a laminated sign that they can tuck under their windshield wiper to indicate what they're doing and for whom, with her contact information as the local coordinator, in case anyone stops to ask them, whether it be enforcement, law enforcement, or civilian. We will share the links and the resources people are sharing in the chat. We have a slide towards the end that will show you the website that we're going to be posting it to, as well as sharing the outcomes from the recorded webinar, as well as the Google document where people are sharing their tips.
So I had another thing I wanted to weigh in on. Somebody asked the question about volunteer waivers. So I would say that's a must, have them sign a waiver, but also have a safety component of that training that you do and go through the specific safety procedures, what they have to do to keep themselves safe, preventative safety, but also have an emergency procedure laid out. Who they're going to call if there's a workman's comp clinic nearby that they have to go to, include all those details in there. Even with a map, just lay it all out as clear as can be and make sure that you document that the volunteer received that training and received that information.
Awesome ideas. Thank you for sharing those.
There's a really helpful comment from Janelle here. Jill and Chris, what do you think about adding a tab to the Google Sheet for us to all add resources to share with the group? That would be great.
I can, yeah, let me do that here. I think you guys can all do it too, right? It's all editable, but I can, if whoever beats me to it, right? Let's see. Too many windows open.
Thank you, Janelle.
Yeah, great idea. All right, I created a resources tab so folks can share links to those.
Sarah Crosby had a question about solo field teams. Are people allowing undergraduate interns to sample alone? I think that's a great question, and a lot of groups might be posed with that sort of situation where you have a solo team that's ready to go out. It's going to be your judgment call if their training is up to par and you feel confident in their work. I don't see why you wouldn't let them go out. Is anyone else dealing with the same situation?
So here in Vermont, we actually aren't allowed to have any field work done by any student intern at all this summer, and that's coming down from the university. So it's a little bit different depending on what your program is run through and what the organization is saying. We cannot have them in the field at all.
Yeah, in New York City, we're basically quarantined. So we are currently trying to figure out if we're going to even have a season, especially since some of the areas that I'm with the Bronx River Alliance, so we're in the Bronx River, but we're seeing contamination not only from CSOs, but also from illegal hookups. So we don't know what all is coming from where, and but what I haven't heard is what is the current research on fecal to oral transmission? And I think that is still really lacking.
I think you're right. Is Sam Chan on the call? Sam sent me some resources. He's been from Oregon Sea Grant. He's been trying to do research to compile what research has been done. And so we can share that with you all. And I know that he's going to be spending some time in the next couple of weeks trying to see what else has been done. I also think there's an opportunity for research in that realm, maybe not with our volunteers, but in if folks are in academia, to be able to apply for grant funds to be able to look at that, because I think it isn't known yet how long the time period is and under what conditions, and depending on the situation, if there's a combined sewer overflow or what. Chris Riggert from Missouri commented that the fact that there are just about 200, there were just over 200 of us on the call at the peak of this call, and the fact that we have people who want to be out doing this, and I think to Jill's point in the entry of opening up, that there's people who care about this, and it's a form of recreation and healthy to be outside, and the fact that there are 200 of us on this call who are talking about how do we work with this and engage these people in a recreation and a form of enjoyment for many of the people who are working with us, is something to be said. There's a lot of people out there who want to engage in this, which I think is our hats off to all of you and to all of them. Are there other key questions? So one thing I'm not sure if folks are doing, I haven't scrolled down in the Google document. If people are, we invite you to add to that list. The Google document is not only made as a source of what other people are telling us, but we would love to have you all share your tidbits in that Google document under the 4 categories that Jill explained, the coordinator guidelines, what people should be doing before leaving home, what you're having your programs do in the field and in the lab. It'd be amazing to populate that Google document with 200 people's ideas and programmatic information. And somebody asked if we'll be pulling, we will pull from the chat as well, but the more you all can do today collectively, the faster it gets to be shared.
Hey Chris, this is Oliver.
Hey Oliver.
Environmental Conservation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just wanted to say that the timing is great because I'm drafting a memo to our commissioner, the head of the department, regarding a proposed approach for our summer lay monitoring program, which is the program here in Vermont that has citizen scientists typically collecting total phosphorus, Secchi, and chlorophyll A from over 75 lakes in the state. So we're trying to come up with an approach. For the summer, we'll probably reduce the overall level of effort significantly. We may do Secchi only and skip the laboratory analysis for total phosphorus and chlorophyll A this summer. And we'll probably reduce sampling frequency, if we do any lab samples, from 8 times to 4 or 5 times per summer, only on a handful of priority lakes. And then we're building in trainings to doing trainings online as opposed to in person, and rolling out a whole bunch of safety guidance as well, which once I get this memo finalized, I'll be happy to add it to the Google Doc drive. But just wanted to say that this discussion has been extremely helpful as we try to gain some semblance of our summer lay monitoring program this year and keep some of the data going. Thanks.
Thanks, Oliver. Do other people, we have just a few more minutes, do other people want to share, the kind of the summary like Oliver just did in terms of what your plans are? There is a question, how are people dealing with instrument calibration? Does anybody have kind of a plan of attack for your instrument calibration processes and recommendations for volunteers?
Hi, this is Jane. We have that in a manual that everyone has a copy of, and we also have a video they can access online.
Nice. And similar, the program I used to work with in Wisconsin, we had calibration videos online for folks for the equipment that was being used, and they each had their own set of equipment, so it wasn't a social distancing problem because people were able to do it on their own. I also think kind of on the fly, if there's a equipment that needs to be calibrated, somebody earlier in the chat here had talked about if the calibration it doesn't work for all pieces of equipment like dissolved oxygen, you couldn't do it. You'd have to, somebody's going to have to leave that piece of equipment on after the calibration. But if there's equipment that can be calibrated and shut off and then leaving it a certain amount of time, disinfecting what you can safely with the isopropyl or ethanol 70% alcohol, and then letting it sit over a few days, if that works, depending on the piece of equipment, that could be an option as well. So Jill, do you want to talk about the summary of where we're headed? And then I have a question in terms of next steps that maybe I can follow up after you share what our plans are.
Yes, sure. And please do let your questions keep coming in, but we will just keep talking about our next steps here. Chris and I will be finalizing the recommendations. I hope people have been adding to that Google spreadsheet. As Chris mentioned, that's going to be the fastest way that we can get information back to you. We're going to share the slides from this PowerPoint, the video recording of the call, as well as a formatted list of recommendations. It'll probably be some kind of Word document that you can use, edit if you want, or append to your SOPs. We'll send that out to the participants. We'll send out a link to those materials to all these participants, as well as listservs that may be interested. And we will definitely be posting at least to Chris's volunteermonitoring.org network site. They have a special COVID page there, and MassBays' website. So those two links are there, and we'll send those out when materials are ready for you.
Mm-hmm. And then the question that I had is, maybe I should have another poll, and I can maybe quick type one up, but is there interest in having other calls as we progress through the season that are similar to this for this group of people to talk about specific challenges? We could potentially say we will talk every other week or something, and have a topic of conversation that we could converse around on that. Let me type up a poll. You can answer verbally if you want. Hold on a minute. I'm going to make a quick poll to ask the question. Here you go. Okay, I can tell you already, the answer is going to be yes. Only 60% of people have answered, and we're at 94% yeses. But I'll give it a second longer so you can answer. And so then, I guess, since I'm getting the inside scoop of what you all are saying is, I would say, let us know in the chat if there's a specific topic that you'd like us to focus on, and then the next call, and Jill and I will kind of put our heads together to figure out how to make that happen. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to show you the results. You can see that there's overwhelmingly positive response to get our group back together again, which is really awesome. It's to credit to all of you for the concern that you have for the volunteers that you work with, and making sure that we have safe recommendations to give to people. So thank you for being here today and being willing to chat with us further. Yeah, so somebody's asking, when you send the follow-up links, can we suggest topics for future webinars then? Yes, sounds great. We'll make a way for that to happen. Maybe a Google form or something like that so you can suggest someplace.